Marcus Thompson believed he was the smartest person in every room he entered. At 35, he had built a reputation as a successful businessman in Miami's competitive real estate market. His expensive suits, flashy watch, and confident smile masked a darker side that few people knew about. Behind closed doors, Marcus ran illegal gambling operations and laundered money through his legitimate businesses. For months, Marcus had been feeling the pressure. Someone was asking too many questions about his operations. His contacts on the street whispered about a new player in town who seemed interested in getting involved with the underground gambling scene. This mystery man had been showing up at the right places, asking the right questions, and making the right connections. The stranger's name was David Cole, and he appeared to be everything Marcus wanted in a business partner. David was well-dressed, spoke confidently about money matters, and claimed to have connections with wealthy clients who enjoyed high-stakes gambling. He drove an expensive car and always had cash to flash around. Most importantly, David seemed eager to invest in Marcus's operations. Marcus had spent weeks watching David from a distance. The man frequented upscale bars, expensive restaurants, and seemed to know all the right people. He talked about his background in finance and his interest in finding profitable investment opportunities that operated outside traditional banking systems. Everything about David screamed money and opportunity. However, Marcus's paranoid nature began to surface. Years of running illegal operations had taught him to be suspicious of everyone, especially newcomers who seemed too perfect. David was asking detailed questions about how the gambling operations worked, who the main players were, and how money moved through the system. While these questions seemed natural for a potential investor, something about David's curiosity felt different. Marcus decided to test David's loyalty and authenticity. He began feeding him false information about upcoming gambling events and fake details about money transfers. He wanted to see if this information would somehow find its way back to law enforcement. When nothing happened after several weeks, Marcus started to relax his guard. The turning point came during a high-stakes poker game in a private room above an Italian restaurant. Marcus was hosting the game, and David had been invited as a special guest. The room was filled with smoke, tension, and the sound of chips clicking against each other. David played well, winning several hands and losing others in a way that seemed natural and unforced. During a break in the game, Marcus pulled David aside for a private conversation. They stepped onto a small balcony overlooking the city lights. Marcus offered David a Cuban cigar and began to probe deeper into his background. David's answers were smooth and consistent, but Marcus noticed small details that bothered him. David's expensive watch looked new, as if he had recently acquired it. His knowledge of certain financial matters seemed textbook perfect rather than experience-based. The final straw came when Marcus casually mentioned a specific type of money laundering technique that only someone with law enforcement training would recognize. David's reaction was subtle, but Marcus caught it. A brief flicker of recognition crossed David's face before he quickly covered it with confusion. In that moment, Marcus became convinced that David was working with the authorities. Marcus's mind raced with possibilities. If David was indeed an undercover agent, then everything Marcus had worked for was in danger. His gambling operations, his money laundering schemes, his entire criminal enterprise could come crashing down. But Marcus was not the type of person to panic. Instead, he began to formulate a plan that would not only protect himself, but also destroy the man who was trying to bring him down. The next morning, Marcus called his most trusted associate, Tommy Rodriguez. Tommy was a former police officer who had been kicked off the force for corruption. He now worked as Marcus's head of security and had connections throughout both the criminal underworld and law enforcement. Marcus needed someone he could trust completely, and Tommy was the only person who fit that description. Marcus met Tommy at a small cafe in downtown Miami. Over coffee and pastries, Marcus explained his suspicions about David Cole. He told Tommy about the subtle signs he had noticed and his growing certainty that David was an undercover federal agent. Tommy listened carefully, asking pointed questions about David's behavior and background. Tommy agreed that Marcus's suspicions seemed reasonable, but he suggested they needed concrete proof before taking any action. Accusing someone of being a federal agent without evidence could backfire spectacularly. If they were wrong, they could end up killing an innocent man and bringing even more heat down on their operations. If they were right but couldn't prove it, David might simply disappear and return later with a warrant and a full team of agents. Marcus had already thought through these possibilities. He had developed a plan that would not only expose David as a federal agent, but also frame him for a serious crime that would destroy his career and credibility. The plan was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its potential consequences. Marcus would plant evidence that made David appear to be a dirty agent who was stealing money from ongoing investigations. The plan required careful timing and attention to detail. Marcus would need to create fake evidence planted in David's apartment, and then tip off the authorities about a corrupt federal agent. The beauty of the plan was that even if David tried to claim he was conducting a legitimate undercover operation, the planted evidence would make him look like he had gone rogue and was stealing from the government. Marcus spent the rest of the day working out the details of his scheme. He would need to obtain David's home address, create convincing fake evidence, and find a way to plant it without being detected. The risk was enormous, but Marcus believed the reward was worth it. He would eliminate the threat to his operations while simultaneously destroying the career and life of the man who had dared to investigate him. As the sun set over Miami, Marcus felt a familiar thrill. He was about to engage in the most dangerous game of his life, and he was confident that his intelligence and cunning would see him through to victory. He had no idea that he was about to make the biggest mistake of his criminal career. David Cole sat in his modest apartment, reviewing the case files spread across his kitchen table. Coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he barely noticed. For 6 months, he had been living a carefully constructed lie, and the pressure was beginning to wear on him. Every morning he woke up as David Cole, successful businessman and potential criminal associate. Every night he went to bed as Special Agent David Patterson of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The apartment itself was part of the elaborate cover story. The FBI had rented it under David's false identity and furnished it with items that supported his background as a wealthy investor. Expensive clothes hung in the closet, luxury items were strategically placed around the rooms, and financial documents with carefully crafted false information were stored in a desk drawer. Everything was designed to convince anyone who might search the place that David Cole was exactly who he claimed to be. Agent Patterson had been working undercover for 8 years, but this assignment was different. Marcus Thompson was not just another criminal running a simple operation. Intelligence suggested that Thompson's gambling and money laundering network had connections to organized crime families across the southeastern United States. The FBI believed that Thompson was a key figure in a much larger criminal enterprise, and bringing him down could lead to dozens of arrests and the seizure of millions of dollars in illegal assets. The challenge was gathering enough evidence to secure convictions. Thompson was careful, paranoid, and surrounded himself with loyal associates who had their own reasons for avoiding law enforcement. Patterson needed to get close enough to observe the operations firsthand, record conversations, and document financial transactions. The work required patience, skill, and nerves of steel. Patterson had noticed Thompson's increasing suspicion over the past few weeks. The questions were becoming more probing, the tests more elaborate. During the poker game, Patterson had felt Thompson's eyes on him constantly, studying his reactions and analyzing his responses. The conversation on the balcony had been particularly intense, with Thompson dropping references that seemed designed to trip up someone with law enforcement. Background: the most dangerous moment had come when Thompson mentioned a specific money laundering technique involving shell corporations and international wire transfers. Patterson recognized it immediately as a method described in FBI training manuals, but he had to pretend ignorance while his mind raced to formulate an appropriate response. He hoped his acting had been convincing, but Thompson's expression suggested otherwise. Back at the FBI field office, Patterson met with his handler, Supervisor Agent Sarah Chen. Chen had been running undercover operations for 15 years and had a reputation for protecting her agents while gathering crucial intelligence. She listened carefully as Patterson described his growing concerns about Thompson's suspicions. Chen shared Patterson's worries, but emphasized the importance of continuing the operation. They were closer than ever to gathering the evidence needed to bring down Thompson's entire network. Financial records indicated that a major money transfer was scheduled for the following week, and Patterson was positioned to observe and document the entire transaction. The risk was significant, but the potential reward was enormous. The meeting took place in a secure room deep within the federal building. Chen reviewed Patterson's reports from the past month, noting the increasing detail and accuracy of his intelligence gathering. Thompson's operation was more sophisticated than they had initially believed, with connections reaching into legitimate businesses, government offices, and even some law enforcement agencies. The corruption was widespread and deeply entrenched. Patterson expressed his concern that Thompson might be planning something. The criminal's behavior had shifted from cautious acceptance to active testing, and Patterson sensed that his cover might be compromised. Chen acknowledged the danger but reminded Patterson that premature withdrawal from the operation could result in years of investigation going to waste. They agreed to continue for another 2 weeks while implementing additional security measures. Unknown to Patterson, Thompson was already putting his plan into motion. Using his connections in the criminal underworld, Thompson had obtained Patterson's home address through a contact who worked for a private investigation firm. The contact had run a background check on David Cole and discovered several inconsistencies in his supposed business history. Most tellingly, there were no records of Cole's claimed business successes before his arrival in Miami 6 months earlier. Thompson shared this information with Tommy Rodriguez, who conducted his own investigation into Cole's background. Tommy's law enforcement connections allowed him to access databases that were not available to civilians. What he discovered confirmed Thompson's suspicions. David Cole's identity was too perfect, too clean, and too recently established. Everything pointed to a carefully constructed federal cover identity. Armed with this knowledge, Thompson began preparing the evidence he would plant in Patterson's apartment. He obtained genuine FBI documentation through a corrupt contact in the Miami Police Department who had access to federal databases. The documents were modified to show that Agent David Patterson had been taking money from evidence, seized in other operations, and depositing it into offshore accounts. The fake evidence was sophisticated and convincing. Thompson had invested significant time and money into making it appear authentic. Bank records showed regular deposits into accounts supposedly controlled by Patterson, and forged internal affairs documents suggested that Patterson was already under investigation for suspicious financial activity. The paperwork was designed to make it appear that Patterson had been stealing from the government for years. Thompson's plan was to break into Patterson's apartment, plant the evidence, and then make an anonymous tip to the FBI's Internal Affairs Division. The tip would claim that a concerned citizen had witnessed suspicious activity and believed that a federal agent was engaged in criminal behavior. The planted evidence would support the accusation and trigger a full investigation that would destroy Patterson's career and credibility. The break-in was scheduled for the following weekend when Thompson knew that Patterson would be attending a gambling event in Fort Lauderdale. Tommy would handle the actual placement of evidence, while Thompson established an alibi by attending a charity fundraiser with dozens of witnesses. The plan appeared foolproof, with multiple layers of protection for Thompson and his associates. As Thompson finalized his preparations, he felt a sense of satisfaction that came from outmaneuvering a federal agent. He believed he had identified the threat to his organization and was taking decisive action to eliminate it. The irony was that while Thompson thought he was protecting his criminal empire, he was actually walking into a trap that would lead to his complete destruction. Patterson continued his undercover work, unaware that his true identity had been discovered. He attended meetings, participated in gambling events, and gathered evidence that would eventually bring down Thompson's entire organization. The FBI's surveillance teams maintained their distance, ready to intervene if Patterson found himself in immediate danger, but hoping to allow the operation to reach its natural conclusion. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine the fate of both men. Thompson believed he held all the advantages, while Patterson trusted in his training and the support of his fellow agents. Neither man realized that the next few days would reveal truths that would change everything they thought they knew about their situation. Saturday night arrived with humid Miami air and the promise of a profitable evening. Patterson had received an invitation to participate in a high-stakes gambling event in Fort Lauderdale, exactly as Thompson had planned. The event was being held at a luxurious private mansion owned by one of Thompson's business associates, and Patterson was expected to attend as David Cole, the wealthy investor looking for exciting opportunities. Patterson prepared for the evening with careful attention to detail. He selected an expensive suit that fit his cover identity, loaded his wallet with cash provided by the FBI, and reviewed the names and backgrounds of the people he was likely to encounter. His wire recording equipment was concealed expertly, and his backup team was positioned strategically around the mansion to provide support if needed. The mansion was impressive even by Miami standards. Located on a waterfront lot with private docks, the property featured marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and artwork that probably cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Security guards checked invitations at the gate, and valet attendants parked the expensive cars that arrived throughout the evening. Everything about the event screamed wealth and exclusivity. Thompson had indeed established his alibi at the charity fundraiser across town. The event was raising money for a children's hospital, and Thompson played the role of generous benefactor with practiced ease. He made donations, posed for photographs with local politicians, and engaged in conversations that dozens of witnesses would later remember. His phone records would show that he remained at the fundraiser until well past midnight. While Thompson was securing his alibi, Tommy Rodriguez was making final preparations for the break-in. He had studied Patterson's apartment building for weeks, noting the security measures, guard schedules, and blind spots in the surveillance cameras. The building's security was adequate for keeping out casual criminals, but Tommy's law enforcement background had taught him how to exploit weaknesses in such systems. Tommy's plan was simple and efficient. He would enter the building through a service entrance during a shift change when security coverage was minimal. His lock-picking skills would get him into Patterson's apartment, where he would quickly plant the forged documents in locations where they would be easily discovered during a search. The entire operation was expected to take less than 20 minutes. At the Fort Lauderdale mansion, Patterson mingled with criminals who had no idea they were speaking to a federal agent. The gambling room featured multiple poker tables, a roulette wheel, and a baccarat table where serious money was changing hands. Patterson participated carefully, winning and losing in patterns that would not attract attention while observing the financial transactions and recording conversations. The evening provided Patterson with valuable intelligence about Thompson's network. He overheard discussions about upcoming money transfers, learned the identities of new associates, and observed the sophisticated methods used to track gambling debts and collections. The information would be crucial for building cases against multiple members of the organization. Meanwhile, Tommy Rodriguez had successfully entered Patterson's apartment building. The service entrance had been left unlocked during the shift change, exactly as he had observed during his surveillance. He made his way to Patterson's floor using the service elevator, avoiding the main lobby where security cameras were most concentrated. Patterson's apartment door presented a standard lock that Tommy defeated in less than 2 minutes. He entered the apartment using a small pen light to navigate without turning on the main lights. The fake documents were concealed in a briefcase that Thompson had prepared, and Tommy's job was to hide them in locations that would be discovered during a thorough search but would not be immediately obvious to casual observation. The first hiding place was behind a framed photograph on Patterson's dresser. Tommy carefully removed the photograph, taped one set of documents to the back of the frame, and replaced it exactly as he had found it. The documents appeared to show that Patterson had been receiving regular payments from an offshore account linked to drug trafficking investigations. The second set of documents was placed inside a book on Patterson's bookshelf. Tommy selected a financial planning guide that looked appropriately boring and unlikely to be examined casually. He carefully cut out a section of pages and inserted documents that appeared to show Patterson had been manipulating evidence in federal cases to protect certain criminal associates. The most damaging evidence was hidden in Patterson's laptop bag. Tommy placed forged internal affairs documents that suggested Patterson was already under investigation for suspicious financial activity and had been recommended for termination from federal service. The documents included signatures and official letterhead that appeared completely authentic. Tommy's work was meticulous and professional. He took photographs of the apartment before placing the evidence and again after completing his work, ensuring that everything appeared exactly as he had found it. He wiped down all surfaces he had touched and used special care to avoid leaving any forensic evidence that could be traced back to him or Thompson. Back at the gambling event, Patterson was having one of the most successful evenings of his undercover career. A major transaction was taking place that involved multiple criminal organizations and millions of dollars in illegal gambling proceeds. Patterson's recording equipment was capturing detailed conversations about money laundering methods, corruption of public officials, and plans for expanding operations into new territories. The irony was almost perfect. While Patterson was gathering evidence that would eventually destroy Thompson's organization, Thompson believed he was simultaneously destroying Patterson's career and credibility. Both men thought they were winning a game that the other didn't realize was being played. Tommy completed his work and exited the apartment building using the same route he had used to enter. His escape was flawless, and he was confident that no one had observed his activities. He drove to a predetermined location where he contacted Thompson, using a secure phone to confirm that the mission had been completed. Successfully, Thompson received Tommy's confirmation while he was giving a speech at the charity fundraiser about the importance of supporting disadvantaged children. The audience applauded his generosity and civic-mindedness, unaware that he had just ordered a crime that could send him to federal prison for decades. Patterson returned to his apartment in the early morning hours, tired but satisfied with the intelligence he had gathered. He had no idea that his home had been violated and that evidence had been planted that could destroy everything he had worked for. He reviewed his notes from the evening, transmitted a brief report to his handler, and went to bed believing that his cover remained intact. The trap was set, the evidence was planted, and Thompson was preparing to make the anonymous call that would trigger an internal affairs investigation into Agent David Patterson. Both men believed they understood the situation completely, but neither realized that the next few hours would reveal the truth about who was really playing whom in this deadly game of deception. Thompson had made one crucial mistake in his planning. In his arrogance and certainty that he had identified a threat, he had failed to consider the possibility that his information about Patterson might be incomplete. The truth about David Cole was far more complex than Thompson realized, and his attempt to frame a federal agent was about to backfire in ways that would destroy everything he had built. Monday morning arrived with the same relentless Miami heat, but for Marcus Thompson, the day held special significance. He sat in his office overlooking Biscayne Bay, holding a prepaid cell phone that would deliver what he believed would be the killing blow to Agent David Patterson's career. The anonymous tip had been carefully crafted to sound like a concerned citizen reporting suspicious. Federal agent behavior. Thompson dialed the FBI's internal affairs hotline and waited for someone to answer. When a professional voice came on the line, Thompson began his performance. He claimed to be a concerned citizen who had witnessed suspicious activity involving a federal agent. He provided Patterson's real name, badge number that he had obtained through corrupt contacts, and detailed information about where evidence of wrongdoing could be found. The internal affairs investigator took detailed notes as Thompson described the planted evidence. Thompson claimed he had seen Patterson meeting with known criminals, accepting cash payments and acting in ways that suggested corruption. He provided specific locations where documents proving Patterson's criminal activity could be found, including the exact hiding places where Tommy had planted the forged evidence. Thompson ended the call, feeling satisfied that he had set events in motion that would destroy Patterson's career and eliminate the threat to his organization. He had no way of knowing that FBI Internal Affairs had sophisticated systems for tracking and investigating such calls, and that his supposedly anonymous tip was already being traced back to its source. Meanwhile, Patterson was at FBI headquarters attending his regular Monday morning briefing with Supervisor Agent Chen. The weekend's gambling event had provided a wealth of intelligence, and Patterson was eager to share what he had learned. The recorded conversations revealed details about upcoming money transfers that could be intercepted, and new associates had been identified who could be targeted for investigation. Chen listened carefully as Patterson described the intelligence he had gathered. The operation was reaching a critical phase where they would soon have enough evidence to obtain warrants and begin making arrests. Patterson's undercover work had exceeded all expectations, and Chen was preparing to recommend him for commendation once the operation concluded successfully. The meeting was interrupted when Chen's phone rang with an urgent call from the Internal Affairs Division. Chen listened with growing concern as the internal affairs investigator described the anonymous tip that had been received about Patterson. The accusations were serious and specific, including claims that Patterson had been taking money from evidence seizures and cooperating with criminal organizations. Chen's first reaction was disbelief, but internal affairs protocol required that all such accusations be investigated thoroughly, regardless of their apparent credibility. The investigator requested immediate access to Patterson's apartment to search for the evidence described in the anonymous tip. Chen realized that the undercover operation might be compromised and that Patterson could be in immediate danger. Patterson was shocked by the allegations but understood that internal affairs had to follow proper procedures. He provided his apartment keys and agreed to accompany the investigators to observe the search. However, his years of undercover work had taught him to be suspicious of coincidences, and he suspected that the anonymous tip might be connected to his investigation of Thompson. The search team arrived at Patterson's apartment within 2 hours of receiving the tip. The team included internal affairs investigators, forensic specialists, and supervisory personnel who would ensure that proper procedures were followed. Patterson watched from the hallway as strangers systematically went through his carefully maintained cover apartment. The investigators found exactly what Thompson had intended them to find. The forged documents were discovered in all 3 locations that Tommy had selected, and the evidence appeared to be genuine federal paperwork documenting Patterson's alleged criminal activities. The bank records showed regular deposits into offshore accounts, and the internal affairs documents suggested that Patterson had been under investigation for months. However, the investigators immediately noticed something that Thompson had not anticipated. The documents were too perfect, too conveniently located, and too comprehensive to be genuine. Experienced internal affairs investigators had seen real corruption cases, and they knew that actual corrupt agents were much more careful about hiding their illegal activities. The forensic specialist examined the documents more closely and discovered subtle signs that they were forgeries. The paper was slightly wrong for the dates indicated, some of the signatures were too perfect, and the printing methods did not match genuine federal documentation from the time periods referenced. Most tellingly, the documents contained information that would not have been available to Patterson, given his actual assignment history. Chen observed the search with growing understanding of what had actually occurred. The anonymous tip, the perfectly placed evidence, and the sophisticated forgeries all pointed to an elaborate attempt to frame Patterson. The timing of the frame attempt, coming just as Patterson's investigation was reaching a critical phase, suggested that his cover had been blown and that Thompson was trying to neutralize him. The internal affairs investigators reached the same conclusion. Instead of finding evidence of Patterson's corruption, they had uncovered evidence of a sophisticated conspiracy to frame a federal agent. The case immediately shifted from investigating Patterson to identifying who had planted the evidence and why. They had targeted him. Patterson realized that his undercover identity had been compromised and that Thompson knew he was a federal agent. The frame attempt was actually confirmation that Patterson had gotten close enough to Thompson's organization to be seen as a genuine threat. Rather than ending the investigation, the frame attempt had provided new evidence of Thompson's criminal activities and demonstrated his willingness to commit additional serious crimes. Chen made immediate decisions to protect Patterson while preserving the investigation. Patterson would be removed from his undercover role and provided with security protection, but the evidence he had gathered would be used to obtain warrants and begin arrests. The frame attempt itself constituted additional charges against Thompson and whoever had assisted him. The forensics team found fingerprints and other evidence that Tommy had missed during his careful preparation. Modern forensics techniques could detect traces of activity that were invisible to the naked eye, and the apartment revealed clear signs that it had been entered illegally. Security camera footage from the apartment building was seized and analyzed to identify who had gained unauthorized access. Thompson spent Monday evening celebrating what he believed was his victory over the federal agent who had threatened his organization. He had dinner at his favorite restaurant, confident that Patterson's career was over and that his own criminal enterprise was safe from federal investigation. He had no idea that his attempt to frame Patterson had actually provided the FBI with additional evidence needed to destroy his organization completely. The investigation had taken an unexpected turn, but Patterson's months of undercover work had not been wasted. The intelligence he had gathered, combined with the new evidence provided by Thompson's frame attempt, gave federal prosecutors everything they needed to build a comprehensive case against the entire criminal organization. Chen briefed her superiors about the developments and received authorization to move forward with arrests. The frame attempt had actually accelerated the investigation timeline, and warrants would be obtained within days rather than weeks. Thompson's attempt to outsmart the FBI had backfired spectacularly, and he was about to learn that framing a federal agent was one of the worst decisions he could have made. Patterson reflected on the irony of the situation as he prepared for the next phase of the investigation. Thompson's paranoia and criminal arrogance had led him to commit additional serious federal crimes in an attempt to protect himself from prosecution for his original crimes. The frame attempt would add decades to any sentence Thompson might receive, and it had provided prosecutors with evidence of criminal conspiracy that would be almost impossible to defend against. The game was reaching its conclusion, and Thompson had no idea that his supposed victory was actually the beginning of his complete downfall. Tuesday morning brought an unusual sense of urgency to the FBI field office in Miami. Supervisor Agent Chen had worked through the night coordinating with federal prosecutors and preparing warrant applications based on Patterson's intelligence and the new evidence provided by Thompson's frame attempt. The case had evolved from a straightforward undercover operation into a complex investigation involving conspiracy to frame a federal agent. Federal prosecutors were eager to move forward with arrests. The evidence collected by Patterson during his months undercover provided detailed documentation of Thompson's gambling and money laundering operations. The frame attempt added serious federal charges that would significantly increase potential sentences for Thompson and his associates. Most importantly, the forensic evidence from Patterson's apartment provided concrete proof of criminal conspiracy that would be difficult for defense. Attorneys to challenge Chen reviewed the arrest warrants that had been approved during the night. Thompson would face charges for operating illegal gambling enterprises, money laundering, conspiracy to obstruct justice, and attempting to frame a federal agent. Tommy Rodriguez faced similar charges plus breaking and entering, evidence tampering, and conspiracy. Additional warrants had been issued for other associates identified through Patterson's investigation. The arrest operation was scheduled to begin at dawn on Wednesday to maximize the element of surprise. Multiple teams would simultaneously execute warrants at locations throughout Miami and surrounding areas. The coordinated operation was designed to prevent Thompson's associates from destroying evidence or fleeing once they learned that arrests had begun. Patterson spent Tuesday in protective custody while federal marshals assessed potential threats to his safety. Thompson's willingness to frame a federal agent suggested he might be prepared to use violence against law enforcement, and Patterson's safety was a top priority. Despite being removed from his undercover role, Patterson continued to provide valuable intelligence about Thompson's operations and associates. Meanwhile, Thompson was becoming increasingly confident that his plan had succeeded. He had received no contact from David Cole since the weekend gambling event, and Thompson interpreted the silence as evidence that Patterson was dealing with serious professional problems. Thompson believed that the internal affairs investigation he had triggered was proceeding exactly as planned. Thompson met with Tommy Rodriguez at their usual location to discuss the status of their operations. Tommy reported that he had seen no signs of increased law enforcement activity, and both men felt comfortable that they had successfully eliminated the federal threat to their organization. They began planning expansion of their gambling operations into new territories, confident that their security had been restored. The irony was profound. While Thompson was planning to expand his criminal activities, federal agents were finalizing plans to destroy his organization completely. The intelligence gathered by Patterson had revealed the full scope of Thompson's network, including financial accounts, real estate holdings, and business relationships that would all be targeted during the arrests. Federal prosecutors had decided to use the frame attempt as the centerpiece of their case against Thompson. While the gambling and money laundering charges were serious, they required complex financial evidence that might be difficult for juries to understand. The frame attempt was straightforward, easily explained. and demonstrated Thompson's consciousness of guilt about his other criminal activities. The forensics analysis of Patterson's apartment had revealed more evidence than expected. In addition to Tommy's fingerprints and DNA evidence, security cameras had captured clear images of him entering and leaving the building. Cell phone records showed that Tommy had contacted Thompson immediately after completing the evidence planting, establishing a direct connection between the two men and the crime. Chen received updates throughout Tuesday as additional evidence was analyzed and arrest plans were finalized. The investigation had grown beyond Thompson's organization to include the corrupt contacts who had provided information about Patterson's real identity. Several current and former law enforcement officers were facing their own federal charges for providing classified information to criminals. Patterson worked with prosecutors to prepare his testimony for the eventual trials. His months of undercover work had provided unprecedented insight into Thompson's operations, and his testimony would be crucial for securing convictions. The frame attempt actually strengthened his credibility as a witness because it demonstrated that Thompson viewed him as a serious enough threat to risk committing additional federal crimes. Tuesday evening found Thompson hosting a celebration dinner for his closest associates. He believed that the threat from federal investigation had been eliminated and that his organization could return to normal operations. The dinner was held at an expensive restaurant where Thompson toasted what he believed was his victory over the FBI. Unknown to Thompson, federal surveillance teams were documenting the celebration dinner and identifying additional associates who might be connected to his criminal activities. The surveillance would provide prosecutors with evidence of Thompson's state of mind and his belief that he had successfully obstructed a federal investigation. Chen conducted final briefings with the arrest teams, scheduled to execute warrants the following morning. The operation involved more than 50 federal agents and would target locations throughout South Florida. Timing was critical because Thompson's associates needed to be arrested simultaneously to prevent them from destroying evidence or warning each other. The evidence collected during Patterson's investigation had revealed that Thompson's organization was more extensive than initially believed. In addition to gambling and money laundering, the group had connections to drug trafficking, public corruption, and other serious crimes. The arrests would likely lead to additional investigations and prosecutions that could continue for years. Patterson spent his final evening in protective custody, reviewing the case files and preparing for his new role as a witness. Rather than an undercover operative, his months of dangerous work were about to pay off in a way that Thompson could never have imagined. The criminal who had tried to destroy Patterson's career was about to discover that he had actually provided the evidence needed to destroy his own freedom. The preparation phase was complete, and the arrest operation would begin in just a few hours. Thompson believed he had won a victory against federal law enforcement, but he was about to learn that underestimating the FBI was one of the most dangerous mistakes a criminal could make. His attempt to frame Patterson had not only failed, but had also provided prosecutors with additional evidence that would ensure he would spend the rest of his life in federal prison. Chen reviewed the final operational plans and felt confident that the arrests would proceed smoothly. Thompson's arrogance and criminal sophistication had actually worked against him by making him believe he could outsmart federal investigators. His frame attempt had been so audacious that it provided clear evidence of his criminal mindset and his willingness to commit serious crimes to protect his organization. The stage was set for the final confrontation between federal law enforcement and Thompson's criminal enterprise. The arrests would begin at dawn, and Thompson would finally learn the true identity of the man he had tried to frame and the devastating consequences of his decision to target a federal agent. Dawn broke over Miami with the sound of helicopters and the rumble of unmarked vehicles converging on locations throughout the city. Federal agents had been in position since 4 a.m, waiting for the coordinated signal to begin simultaneous arrests of Thompson's entire organization. The operation represented months of planning and would determine whether Patterson's dangerous undercover work would result in justice or legal complications. Thompson was awakened at his luxurious waterfront home by the sound of his front door being smashed open. Federal agents wearing bulletproof vests and carrying assault rifles flooded into his bedroom, shouting commands for him to remain still and keep his hands visible. the man who had believed he had outsmarted. The FBI found himself face down on his expensive carpet with his hands zip-tied. Behind his back, the lead agent read Thompson, his rights while other agents began searching his home for evidence. Thompson's shock was complete and overwhelming. He had been so confident that his frame attempt had succeeded that he was unable to understand how federal agents had found him. His mind raced through possibilities, but none of them made sense given what he believed about David Cole's destroyed career. Meanwhile, Tommy Rodriguez was experiencing his own rude awakening across town. Federal agents had surrounded his apartment building and were prepared for the possibility that he might resist arrest or attempt to destroy evidence. Tommy's law enforcement background made him dangerous, but it also made him understand that resistance was futile when facing a coordinated federal operation. As Thompson was processed at the Federal Detention Center, he demanded to speak with his attorney and repeatedly asked how the arrests had been possible. The federal agents provided no information about their investigation, following standard procedure for ongoing cases. Thompson would not learn the truth about David Cole's real identity until his first court appearance later that day. Patterson watched the arrests from the FBI command center, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and relief that his months of dangerous work had finally concluded successfully. The surveillance footage showed Thompson's complete shock and confusion as he was arrested, and Patterson realized that Thompson still had no idea that his frame attempt had actually accelerated his own downfall. Federal agents executed search warrants at more than 20 locations associated with Thompson's organization. The searches revealed extensive evidence of criminal activity, including financial records, gambling equipment, weapons, and documentation of corrupt relationships with public officials. The evidence supported all of the charges that had been filed and revealed additional crimes that had not been previously discovered. Chen coordinated the operation from federal headquarters, receiving regular updates as arrests were completed and evidence was secured. The operation was proceeding exactly as planned, with no injuries to agents or suspects and no significant evidence destruction. Thompson's organization was being systematically dismantled with precision and efficiency. The financial aspects of Thompson's operation were particularly extensive. Federal accountants began analyzing bank records, real estate holdings, and business investments that represented years of money laundering activity. The financial investigation would ultimately reveal that Thompson's organization had processed tens of millions of dollars in illegal proceeds through seemingly legitimate businesses. Thompson's first court appearance was scheduled for that afternoon, and federal prosecutors were prepared to present evidence that would ensure he remained in custody pending trial. The frame attempt provided compelling evidence that Thompson was a flight risk and a danger to law enforcement personnel. His own criminal actions had eliminated any possibility of receiving bail. When Thompson finally met with his attorney, the lawyer reviewed the charges and explained the overwhelming evidence that federal prosecutors possessed. The attorney was particularly concerned about the frame attempt charges, which demonstrated consciousness of guilt and could result in severe sentencing enhancements. Thompson's decision to target a federal agent had transformed a serious case into a potentially life-ending catastrophe. The truth about David Cole's real identity was revealed to Thompson during his initial court hearing. When the prosecutor identified the victim of the frame attempt as Special Agent David Patterson, Thompson's expression changed from confusion to horror as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. He had not simply tried to frame an innocent person. He had attempted to destroy the career of a federal agent conducting a legitimate investigation. Patterson testified before a federal grand jury about his undercover investigation and the frame attempt. His detailed knowledge of Thompson's operations, combined with the physical evidence from the planted documents, provided prosecutors with an overwhelming case that would be difficult for defense attorneys to challenge. The frame attempt had actually strengthened the case against Thompson by providing additional charges and demonstrating his criminal mindset. Federal prosecutors offered Thompson's associates plea agreements in exchange for cooperation and testimony against Thompson. Several associates accepted the offers, providing additional evidence about Thompson's leadership role in the criminal organization and his decision to frame Patterson. The cooperation further strengthened an already solid case. Thompson's trial became a sensation in Miami legal circles because of the audacious nature of his frame attempt. Legal experts noted that criminals who target federal agents typically receive the harshest possible sentences because such actions strike at the heart of law enforcement operations. Thompson's attempt to destroy Patterson's career had actually sealed his own fate. The evidence presented during the trial was comprehensive and devastating. Patterson's recorded conversations documented Thompson's criminal activities in detail, while the forensic evidence from the frame attempt proved Thompson's willingness to commit additional crimes to protect his organization. The jury deliberated for only 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Thompson's sentencing hearing was attended by Patterson and other federal agents who had worked on the case. The judge noted that Thompson's attempt to frame a federal agent was particularly egregious because it demonstrated contempt for the rule of law and willingness to destroy an innocent person's career to protect criminal activities. Thompson received a sentence of 45 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Tommy Rodriguez also received a lengthy sentence for his role in the frame attempt and his participation in Thompson's criminal organization. His background in law enforcement was considered an aggravating factor because he had betrayed his oath to protect and serve the public. Several other associates received sentences ranging from 5 to 20 years depending on their level of involvement. Patterson returned to regular FBI duties with commendations for his undercover work and his professionalism during the frame attempt. His investigation had resulted in the conviction of more than 30 individuals and the seizure of assets worth over $50 million. The case became a textbook example of successful undercover operations and the importance of protecting agent identities. The final irony was that Thompson's paranoia and criminal sophistication had actually caused his downfall. If he had simply accepted David Cole as a legitimate businessman and continued his normal operations, he might have avoided detection for years longer. Instead, his attempt to eliminate what he perceived as a threat had provided federal prosecutors with evidence that guaranteed his life imprisonment. Chen reflected on the case as one of the most successful operations of her career. Thompson's frame attempt had backfired so completely that it seemed almost scripted, but the reality was that criminals who target federal agents typically make emotional decisions that lead to their own destruction. Thompson had learned too late that trying to frame the wrong man can be a fatal mistake when that man is an undercover FBI agent.